What's going on, everybody? It's Jake from Arete Media, and this is going to be a little bit different video. It's one I've been wanting to do for a very long time. It's another reaction video, but this is a reaction to a video, namely The Take, which is a channel on YouTube. I highly recommend you check them out. They uploaded a video, gosh, this has been months ago, and I watched it, and I disagreed with it to a certain extent, and normally I agree with the majority of what the Take says in their videos, but I will confess to recognizing some bias in what they do. But like I said, for the most part, I love what they do. It's a great channel. I highly recommend you check it out. There's also a link to the original video in the description. Please go watch it in its entirety so you don't have to, you can experience what they have to say without my interrupting mess. And then another disclaimer too, I am not saying that the premise of the video is wrong. I want to be crystal clear about that. Basically, the point, what I'm going to be doing, and the point of what I'm doing is I'm going to be pointing out some instances of whether I think not sources, but basically the films that they're citing and talking about, they're either taking things, it's like what they're saying is either a little bit of a stretch, or I don't think they've seen the movies like at all. There's a couple moments like that. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Okay, so once again, the video we're going to be talking about is the Asexual Asian Man that was uploaded by The Take. And like I said, agree with most of it, but there's a couple of instances that I just flat out disagree. And this is not, again, to poke a hole in what they're saying. This is just to bring some additional perspective and just, I guess, to enlighten a little bit more. So I cannot stress enough how this is not meant to hate on The Take in any way, shape, or form. But without further ado, let's get into it.
But I'm just not that attracted to Asian men.
Asian male characters in film and TV have long been sidelined, emasculated, and denied the chance to have romantic or sexual relationships.
So this is one example where they're 100% spot on, in particular with the shot choice of Raj Koothrappali from The Big Bang Theory, along with the other ones. But I mean, Raj is kind of the epitome of being a butt of the joke for the Stereotype. For those of you who haven't seen the series, I think it's the first two seasons, Raj cannot even speak to a woman unless he is inebriated. And obviously the prospect of having, any sort of sexual relationship with a woman is out of the question until much, much later in the series. Now, the character does grow, but there's no denying that it is strictly played for laughs, for the most part, much to the detriment of the character. So, like I said at the beginning, they are not wrong, especially in this case.
That's when they're not openly mocked.
You promise not to be angry. I might let you take those pictures we mentioned.
When?
Sometime.
Anytime.
In an inverse of the trend of fetishizing Asian women through the lotus blossom trope.
Okay, so this is my first issue. First of all, the Mickey Rooney thing, 100% right. There's no way you can't say that was racist. It was 1961, but still racist. So, but this in particular is where we start to get into my issue with this video essay, is what I'll call it. If you think that Taka from The Last Samurai is an example of the lotus blossom trope, I have a hard time seeing it. Only because at no point is there a sexual relationship between Taka and Algren, who is played by Tom Cruise. If there is one, it's very, very, very subtly hinted at, which I guess you could make the case that it's not a very strong case, but I guess you can make the case that the scene where she's helping him put on his armor is kind of like a subtle hint that they may have, I wouldn't even say a sexual relationship, but just chemistry. But at the end of the day, he does need help putting his armor on, so I guess it's kind of a classy way to have that sort of chemistry shown on screen. And they do obviously develop a a relationship of sorts because he bonds with her sons, who, obviously they lost their dad. And spoiler alert, Nathan Algren killed their father in battle. But this example, I think in this case, they just took a picture of a woman in a quasi-naked state from a movie that had a white man in a role alongside an Asian woman and kind of used, this has to be the lotus blossom trope. But anyway, we'll continue because they bring up The Last Samurai at another point later in the video.
Asian men are consistently desexualized on screen, and this has directly led to the damaging widespread perception in U.S. society that Asian men are less masculine or sexually desirable.
I did read somewhere that the people that do worst on the apps are Asian men and black women.
Well, it's great white people finally have an advantage somewhere.
Here's
I'm sorry, that is funny, and I did read somewhere that there's at least studies that suggest that to be the case, but that is pretty funny. I also took issue with them citing, again, a shot with Mr. Miyagi, because, again, if you've ever seen The Karate Kid, you know that Miyagi's wife, and now I'm drawing a blank, I cannot remember if his wife dies in childbirth or if something happens to their child shortly after the child is born. I want to say he had a daughter. But again, like they show a clip of Mr. Miyagi, who is a whole boatload of stereotypes, but certainly not in a malicious manner, a little bit of a cliched manner. But again, this was back when The Karate Kid first came out. But to suggest that Mr. Miyagi was sexless is not true, nor was he weak and not quote-unquote masculine, because Mr. Miyagi never lost a fight in the series. And then you continue on to The Karate Kid Part 2, Miyagi has an established relationship with an old flame back in Okinawa. So to make the assertion that Mr. Miyagi was never sexual is just patently false. So it's just a bad example to illustrate your point, is all I'm getting at.
our take on how the asexual Asian trope has been used to spread stereotypes of Asian men in real life, and why it's more important than ever to move past it.
They also want, you know, nerdy Asian men to feel that they are worthy of love.
Okay, I do want to this is completely off topic, but I do want to give a shout out to Constance Wu because she is just hilarious. I'm pretty sure I first saw her in Fresh Off the Boat, but I've seen her in other things, not least of which Crazy Rich Asians, not Asians. Sorry, Constance, butchering it. But yeah, Constance Wu is hysterically funny.
The problem is when you make fun of them in a secondary role where you don't explore their whole lives.
That's true. And that pretty much goes with any group, too. This one, they're talking about the trope of the asexual Asian, which is a long-lasting stereotype. But that's true for any marginalized group, particularly in cinema, in terms of representation. It's hard to not devolve into a stereotype when you have side characters that aren't well-rounded just out of necessity of a story. So that's very, very true.
If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get
Absolutely
notified about all our new
Absolutely subscribe to The Take because, again, they do really, really, really cool and good stuff.
videos.
Interesting.
His name is Long Duck Dong.
I gotta sleep under some Chinaman named after a duck stork.
Cinema is full of Asian male characters who have been stereotyped and belittled, their foreignness frequently treated as the butt of the joke.
You gonna on me? Nobody's gonna on you. We're on your side. I hate Godzilla.
While today we've at last moved beyond the regressive idea that an act
I don't know if Ken Jeong is the best choice to illustrate your point there because Ken Jeong is also another actor who, yes, he's done some roles where his Asianness is exploited for comedy, but he's done some other roles where it's not even really brought up. Role Models comes to mind, and he's just as funny in that movie as anything else. Not to mention, I believe his first role was the obstetrician in Knocked Up. I could be wrong, but I think that was his first role, and again, he was hilarious in that too. And I don't believe his ethnicity was ever brought up in either of those movies. So kind of a testament to how far we've come, because part of the issue I have with the video is at one point they acknowledge that progress has been made, a lot of progress has been made, but then they kind of bring it back to like it's still the same as it used to be, and it's like, yes, it's still a problem, but you can't deny that some progress has been made for sure, especially lately, like within the last 3 or 4 years.
Accent is a funny joke.
So Grandpa's hyena don't get disturbed.
Hernia.
The asexual Asian man trope is still omnipresent, coming through in a variety of forms and character types.
Everybody, please. Han just clearly injured his vagina.
The stereotypical...
Okay, so I will admit to have only watched Two Broke Girls, like, I think 2 episodes, so I'm not familiar with the character dynamics, but not just in that clip, but in other clips, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but it seems to me that they tend to make fun of they tend to make more, which I guess this does tie into the trope a little bit, they do tend to make fun of him more so for being effeminate rather than Asian per se, but I guess that goes into the trope of Asian men often being stereotyped into effeminate roles, so I guess that's where they're going with it.
Asian male character might be nerdy, weak, or effeminate, especially in contrast to hyper-masculine white male characters. He's typically reduced to a marginal role, like sidekick to a white guy.
You rating-oriented idiot.
Mysterious martial arts master.
So, again, we show a clip of, not this one, the one that just ended. We show a clip of Ken Watanabe, who plays Katsumoto in The Last Samurai, who I don't know that you would call him a martial arts master in the cliche sense. I mean, obviously he is, but his character. And I would like to point out that, again, that was a co-production between Hollywood and Japan. And the samurai are not portrayed in an unflattering light at all in that movie. Other than unless you consider, I wouldn't even say that they're quasi-mystical. They're certainly probably in an over sympathetic light, historically speaking, but I don't know that you could say that it's necessarily mystical. Now, this, if you've seen Kill Bill, you know this is 100% they're correct about. This is just bad. Is that an arrow in his hair? Don't know. I only saw Kill Bill once, and I don't care to ever watch it again.
Or cartoonish villain.
Your brother's soul is mine.
And an overwhelming number of these characters have no...
Okay. Hence the shirt. Cartoonish villain is a bit much in this case because, again, they used a literal cartoon, and they used Shang Tsung from the live-action Mortal Kombat from 1995. These two films have one thing in common, in that the main protagonist of each of those movies is also Asian, albeit in Mulan, one is an Asian female, and there's something to be said about the fact that the Huns are their skin is dark. Now, I can see where they're coming from, and I'm honestly not sure of the answer if that was done more so that children would understand, because dark colors are associated with bad, and obviously Mulan and her cohorts are usually presented in bright colors whenever they're on screen and not in a combat scenario. So I'm not going to touch that one, but I do take issue with the Mortal Kombat example because, yes, this actor is a villain and he is Asian, but the main protagonist in Mortal Kombat is also Asian, Robin Shu, Liu Kang, who plays Liu Kang. And not only that, he plays a character who has moved away from his, how would you say, traditional Asian roots, because he was raised in the Order of Light Temple, which is a Shaolin monastery in China. And he, in this movie adaptation, not in the video game in other canon, he's always been a monk, a Shaolin monk, but in this movie, he actually plays a character who sort of goes away from that sort of traditional Asian background. And presumably is in the West, although I don't know if they ever, I can't remember if they ever say where he ends up, but he does eventually end up in Hong Kong to get on the boat. And also, I'm cartoonish in the sense that, I mean, yeah, it's based off of a video game, so I guess it's a little cartoonish, but I think the slight they're trying to point out here, I don't think that's accurate in the case of Mortal Kombat. Now, to be fair, this actor, he's done various, he does a lot of villainous roles. Obviously, I haven't seen every movie he's been in, so I can't speak to whether or not he's a stereotypical Asian villain in terms of the cliche, but he does have a reputation as being a villain, although not always, because he was in a little Disney Channel gem called Johnny Tsunami, where he is most definitely not a villain, and he's pretty cool.
Romantic relationship in sight.
If Bruce Banner's driving a rental car and turns into the Hulk, do you think he's covered, or does he need to add the Hulk as an additional driver?
You really need a girlfriend.
But it wasn't always like this. In the early...
So that clip from The Big Bang Theory, yes, Raj is the butt of the joke there, but those conversations are commonplace between those four men. Although I will say, most of the time, Raj is the one who gets made fun of for not having a girlfriend, but Walter does as well. Before Howard, not Walter, I'm sorry. Howard, I was thinking Wolowitz. Howard does as well, and most of the jokes at his expense are him being an engineer. He's, made a robot girlfriend, or the infamous episode where he makes a machine that's a robotic hand, and he uses it to take the place of a female companion and ends up having to go to the emergency room because it gets stuck. So, yes, I acknowledge Raj is the butt of most of the jokes, but he is by no means the butt of all the jokes. So,
early days of silent film in Hollywood, Japanese actor Sesu Hayakawa became a huge star and one of Hollywood's first iconic sex symbols. So why was he also one of the last leading Asian men in the following decades? The Chinese Exclusion Act of 18...
So they're hitting the nail right on the head. I'm not going to stay on this too long because they explain it, but they hit the nail on the head, and I actually really, really, really want to see these movies. But yes, they're about to talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act, and this was a huge, huge part in marginalizing Asian people and people of Asian descent, not just in film and cinema, obviously, but everywhere in the immediate.
1982, which prohibited Chinese immigration into the U.S., represented an American fear of yellow peril.
A letter appeared in the pages of the New York Sun, written by a young Chinese immigrant.
This country is the land of liberty for all men of all nations, except the Chinese.
This was the idea that Asian immigrants posed a threat to an American way of life. As a result of these fears, Asian men in early cinema were villainized as dangerous threats, often to white women. In the 1915 movie The Cheat, Hayakawa plays a predator who exploits a spoiled white society woman.
So, again, having not seen these movies, but obviously this is a clip from obviously the same movie that they showed earlier, because the actress is the same and the actor looks the same as he did in the previous clip. So this is an example of, again, where they highlight progress and then use clips from the exact same movie to illustrate how, the bad part, essentially. And again, haven't seen these movies. I can't really speak to the context. This would appear to be what they're talking about in terms of an Asian man being a threat to a white woman, but haven't seen the movie, but just pointing that out.
Fu Manchu movies also played into this
trope. Fu Manchu.
I will wipe out your whole accursed white race. Oh, no!
But Fu Manchu himself was almost always played by a white man in yellow face.
See, yeah, that was a huge problem, particularly a little bit later on. Bruce Lee himself actually was victim to this in the show Kung Fu, because as the story goes, Bruce Lee helped create the original concept, and it was supposed to be him in the starring role. Eventually, David Carradine would play the lead role instead and have some extremely comical scenes of Carradine's character as a youth training with a martial arts master. Obviously not Asian in the slightest, and those are some pretty comical scenes. So this was unfortunately commonplace, and I'm glad it's no longer the case. Never should have happened in the first place, but it did, and unfortunately, we can't do anything about it now, but we can move forward, which thankfully we appear to be doing for the most part.
Painting Asians as villains while reminding the audience of who held the real power.
It is said that the devil plays for men's souls. So does Dr. Fu Manchu, Satan himself, evil incarnate.
Meanwhile, in real life, labor and immigration laws meant that Asian men had to take jobs that white men didn't want, such as laundering, cooking, and washing dishes, which were seen as women's work. This was later
This is true, but it was other marginalized groups as well. So, I mean, obviously, closer on to the West Coast, historically, this is the case largely for Asian immigrants, particularly on the West Coast. But if you go pretty much anywhere in the country, marginalized groups, including the Irish, early enough in American history, this happened to them a lot as well, although much earlier as far as the widespread exploitation and whatnot. But they're right, but let's not forget that it wasn't exclusively, although a case could be made that it disproportionately affected Asian immigrants, especially for a long period of time.
Reflected in on-screen portrayals that dismissively portrayed Asian men in these kinds of roles.
He does the dishes and helps with the laundry, you betcha.
Over the decades, increasing numbers of Asian men found success in high-powered fields like medicine and law, thus solidifying the model minority myth.
I'm telling you, those Asian guys...
See, I wonder, and this is purely a question because I don't know, I wonder, because that's another stereotype too, I wonder if that was an attempt to correct past mistakes, but they went a little overboard with the idealization of certain traits, and that ended up kind of continuing the stereotype, but in a more flattering light. I wonder.
I love crunchy numbers.
Yet Asian men's growing class power was plagued by a desexualization meant to reinforce the existing power dynamic, which kept white men on top. As Matthew Salas writes for The Guardian, this emasculation of Asian men was a deliberate way for white men to show that societal power may come at the cost of sexual power. The model minority Asian American male might become a doctor.
I referenced that scene already with Ken Jeong as the obstetrician. I believe that was his first film role. I could be wrong, like I said, but interesting clip choice. But you know, I wonder what someone like Ken Jeong's opinion would be on that. Honestly, because it's like, is it a stereotype to cast an Asian man as a doctor in a movie? I'll be honest, I don't know.
Or lawyer or engineer, but he can't get the girl. Meanwhile, this...
I think that clip's a little unfair because, again, this character is not essential through the entire movie, so we don't need to know the obstetrician's backstory. You know, so I just think that's an unfair clip to use, but I guess you got to put something there, right?
This desexualized portrayal came in sharp contrast to the hypersexualized depiction of Asian women through the submissive, exotic lotus blossom trope.
Another trope that is 100% true. Now, part of this trope in particular, I think, is just due to some historical context because there were Americans fighting in Southeast Asia for multiple wars, long time, because you have, men fighting in the Pacific during World War II. And in fact, there was a phrase that came about called the China Marine, and those were Marines that were stationed in China after the Japanese surrendered, and many of them, befriended Chinese nationals. Some of them, obviously found themselves Chinese wives, or throughout some of the, I know it happened on Okinawa as well. And then you progress to the Korean War, and a running joke in MASH too, which is set during the Korean War, is, shore leave was in Tokyo. And then carry that through to Vietnam, where, again, men are stationed in Southeast Asia. Shore leave is in places, not shore leave, I'm sorry, just leave, R&R. Places like in Japan or Okinawa or various other places. So I think this trope kind of came out of, like most tropes and stereotypes do, something happened historically, and then it just gets inflated in the zeitgeist. To the point where, in the Philippines too, that kind of stuff. But I think that's where it came from, but obviously it had gotten taken way too far, to the point of being a stereotype and not a very good thing overall.
She says she's very happy to belong to handsome captain. She says she's gonna serve you well.
Asian men were often made out to be inferior choices or threats to Asian women, who were then available to be rescued by white men.
Maybe I can save one of them.
Okay. This is my main issue with this video right here. That clip, I'm going to go back and pause on it. So this movie right here, Flowers of War, I have a bone to pick with not only this video, but actually Roger Ebert, who had a problem with Christian Bale playing this lead character. And I don't remember the exact quote, but something to the effect of, why is Christian Bale necessary in this story? Well, I'm about to tell you. Because this story is based on a novel, and the author of said novel based a lot of the information for her novel, and she is a Chinese author, by the way, off of the biography of Minnie Vautrin. I believe I'm pronouncing that Vautrin, Vautrin, and Wilhelmina Minnie Vautrin was an American missionary, interestingly enough, from Indianapolis, where I hail from originally. She was from Indianapolis, and she died there too. She was an American missionary who founded she was a Christian missionary who operated in China for 28 years, and she happened to be in China, in Nanking, during the Nanking Massacre. And she spent a lot of time, the college that she was working in and I believe helped found, she was at least a high-ranking official. I believe she was the president of the university. They housed several Chinese people in there, protecting them from the Japanese. And one of the stories that she wrote about is that the Japanese, or a group of a group of Japanese soldiers during the Nanking Massacre came to the college demanding comfort women. Now, Minnie had also taken in this is how the story goes, according to her diary, she had taken in a number of prostitutes as well, who worked in Nanking, obviously wasn't safe for them, and faced with the prospect of having to, give up some of the women who were prostitutes, or some of the students or other refugees. The prostitutes, according to her biography, came out willingly and went with the group of Japanese soldiers and were not heard from again. Now, this movie, I'm gonna throw a disclaimer out there. I've only watched it twice. I watched it once again in preparation for this video, and I'm not gonna lie, it's not fun to watch. I think it's necessary to watch at least once, but I will forewarn you, it is very graphic. It is very accurate to what was happening during the Nanking Massacre, and those of you that are familiar with it know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to get into it. Don't Google it unless you're. It's not a good movie. I mean, it's a great movie, but it's not fun to watch. And I'm not gonna lie. Each time I watched it, I went to it's not a pleasant experience, but I think it's necessary. I will say anyone who has had any sort of trauma or been assaulted, I highly recommend you don't watch it alone. If you watch it at all, just be prepared. There's some unpleasant things, but I think it's necessary to watch because it does. The character that Christian Bale plays is fictional, but it is based, albeit loosely, it's based on a real person who was an American. So the film is historically authentic in the sense that it tells the story, and there were many Westerners who were there, one of whom was a Nazi, like a card-carrying Nazi, and he saved many people during the Nanking Massacre. So it not only did real history blur some lines here, and ironically enough, there was also a Japanese diplomat who saved many Jews' lives during the Holocaust by signing basically visas for them to get out of Germany as he was. And the story goes that as his train was leaving Germany, he was signing these visas and throwing them out the window for people to catch, as the story goes. So I take a great issue with them citing this particular movie. It's like you could have picked so many movies and been so right. It tells me they haven't seen this movie, is what it tells me, because you could have picked so many movies and you would have been so dead on. This movie is not a white savior movie, like, at all. And even if it is, this one is at least, it's not historically accurate in the sense of the character, but it is historically authentic in that it tells the story of a Westerner who happened to be in Nanking when it was happening, saved lives. And the plus the fact too, again, this is another co-production between Chinese studio and a Hollywood studio. They specifically, I guess it's my understanding that they specifically asked for a Hollywood actor to play the role of, I forget his name, John something or other. And yeah, it's, but if you watch the movie, you'll know what I mean by this. He's not even the real hero. Like he helps out, but he's by no means the true hero of the story. I believe the girl in the shot here, I believe her character's name is Yu Mo. She's a hero. The other prostitutes in the movie are heroes, every single one of them. I'd say probably the biggest hero of the movie is a character named George, who, ironically, I don't believe they show in this video. George is the biggest hero. There's also, I believe it's not General Lee, I believe Colonel Lee, who is a Chinese soldier who has some really badass moments in the movie. I would argue that he's a bigger hero than Christian Bale's character in this movie. In fact, Christian Bale's character starts as a downright loathsome human being. But yeah, George is the real hero in this movie. And not gonna lie, you will probably cry multiple times if you watch this movie, and not in the good way. It's like I said, it's not pleasant, but I've delved on this long enough. But this is probably the biggest issue I took with this video right here, is the fact that they're using Flowers of War as an example of a white savior movie when it is just not the case. And Roger Ebert, learn about the period that the movie takes place in before you criticize it for the ethnic roles, as it were.
I can save one of them with your help.
Ultimately, it was this combination of the emasculated Asian man and the objectified lotus blossom that allowed for white male supremacy.
Here we go again. Is it really lotus blossom objectification when the character in question is an actual prostitute that is in China? This is a legitimate question. I don't know, but like, how far can we take this? Because there were prostitutes in Nanking. This story, the overall story, apparently actually happened, albeit without Christian Bale's character, but it was an American. Just happened to be a woman who was a missionary. But I don't want to ruin the movie because it's a very, very, very intense movie, and I don't want to ruin it. But suffice it to say that, at least as far as I can tell, and I could be dead wrong, but I don't think I am, this is not a white savior movie.
Over both Asian men and...
There's George right there. The gentleman on the left side of the screen with the glasses. This is George, who is the biggest hero, and I'm not going to ruin it, but he's the hero of that movie, by far. By far. It's just... Watch the movie with that huge disclaimer, and be prepared to pause it and take a break. That's all I'm going to say.
And women.
What's happening, hot stuff?
There are a variety of different tropes and cliches used to desexualize, sideline, and emasculate Asian men in pop culture. Let's take a look at some of the most common ones.
This time I'm warning you! I am definitely, this time, going to call in the police!
The FOB, or fresh off the boat character, is primarily used as comic relief.
So
What's your name?
Dong.
What's your first name?
Long.
Cinema.
True, and this isn't just the case with Asian men, if we can recall Fez from that 70s show. Another example of a fresh off the boat character who ironically lasted 8 seasons. I don't know how long fresh off the boat jokes will last. Although if you do watch that 70s show in its entirety, Fez does eventually, if you compare Fez from season 1 to season 8, obviously he's much more acclimated to how they do things in the US, but still very much the butt of jokes.
Is full of offensive examples of this, like Mickey Rooney's yellow-faced portrayal of Mr. Yunioshi in 1961's Breakfast at Tiffany's,
100%.
and 1984's 16 Candles
100%.
Long Duck Dong. An
Yep.
exchange student whose broken English and inability to assimilate into American culture makes him a laughingstock for his peers.
Oh, no more Yankee, my wanky.
Yep. No disagreement with these examples whatsoever. None.
The Donga need food.
The FOB character is especially damaging in how it depicts Asian men as bumbling and stupid, ignorantly suggesting that having an accent is a sign of low intelligence, and turning the difficulty of the immigrant experience into something to snicker at.
The little boy take knife. The big boy take a donut. Bad boy.
Any sexual or romantic interest these characters display are usually part of a larger joke made at their expense.
People with boobs touch me.
She means aside from your mom.
Didn't know.
The television series Two Broke Girls came under fire for its depiction of Han Lee, a Korean immigrant whose difficulty adjusting to American culture and getting girls is a constant running joke for the main cast.
So I'm glad that they pointed out that it, caught fire. And like I said, I haven't seen Two Broke Girls at length, so I can't speak to this example. But based on the clips, I can imagine it was pretty bad. But like they said, they came under fire for this, so that's a good thing, because I don't think the actor was necessarily heartbroken about. But this does remind me of another show that had, I think this character was actually gay, Young and Hungry. Yeah, that was the name. I forget the character's name, but another example, I think it was the male lead's assistant, Josh, I think his name was, not the assistant, but the male lead. I want to say it was Josh. I don't know how often they brought up his race per se. I think they mainly just made jokes about his sexuality, which again it's not really better, but I mean sometimes comedy is offensive. So I mean it's a line you have to tread carefully. But again, take any of these criticism with a grain of salt, though, because I mean, if the actor's okay with it, but who's to say the actor was okay with it? I'm going in a circle here, because you can make the argument, yeah, the actor's okay with it, but at the same time, if the actor makes too many waves, they might lose that paycheck, and nobody wants that. So, can understand. But like they said, the show apparently caught fire, and it wasn't a flattering portrayal, from what I can tell.
With this costume, my chances of getting laid are higher than ever.
So 0?
The sidekick is another popular way Asian men are portrayed in media.
Can I be your guy in the chair?
Okay. Now we get to Spider-Man. So, and not only, I believe this was, that was this actor's first film. And I think Tom Holland was instrumental in him getting cast because of the chemistry they had. But Ned Leeds in the comics is not, at least not that I'm aware of, has he ever been portrayed as being of Asian descent. So, again, how far are we going to take this criticism here? Because, yes, in this script, he is technically, he's not just a sidekick, though. He's Peter's best friend. And as the movies progress, his role gets bigger and bigger. And it's hinted at in Spider-Man No Way Home that he is actually a magic user. And could be hinted at him becoming, it's speculated that he could become a major villain or train under Wong or Doctor Strange and become a sorcerer. So that's not exactly a bit part. So again, I think this example doesn't really fit what they're trying to do, because yes, in the first movie he's Peter's best friend and Peter is Spider-Man, but I don't know how much and I would hardly call Ned a flat character even in the first movie, because he helps Peter win the day. you know, he's in a supporting role, but he's not, I wouldn't say he's relegated. And even in this scene, he asks if he can be his guy in the chair. So it's not like Peter is like, oh, you're not white, so you can't help me. You have to be my sidekick. Like, that never happens.
What? You know how there's a guy with a headset telling the other guy where to go? Like, if you're stuck in a burning building, I could tell you where to go.
One of the earliest examples is the character Kato, played by Bruce Lee in the 1966 series The Green Hornet. Kato serves as the Green Hornet's valet and martial arts expert.
Hornet sting. Check. Let's roll, Kato.
As a sidekick, the asexual Asian usually doesn't have the opportunity to experience romantic relationships, as these are reserved for the usually white protagonist. Even a modern...
So what I have seen from the Green Hornet, that is true. I don't know how much influence Lee had in that, in terms of Kato not really being romantic on screen. Bruce was married at the time. I have no idea if that played a part in that or not. It should be noted, though, that the role of Kato was expanded from what it was originally planned to be on the show. Originally, he wasn't supposed to have a lot of speaking parts, and there were subtle changes that Bruce was fairly insistent on, one of which being that, you know, there are scenes where Kato is seen sitting on the desk instead of, like, in a corner, which it doesn't seem like much, but in the 1960s, that was actually a big deal. He was close. I'm not going to say he wasn't equal to the Green Hornet, but he was closer to an equal, and this is all things that Lee has spoken about. It's also interesting to note that, as far as I understand, that when the Green Hornet was airing in Hong Kong, where Lee was originally from, it wasn't called the Green Hornet, it was called the Kato Show, and was instrumental in producer Raymond Chow, who I believe he knew about Lee already, but obviously there had been a bridge in his acting in Hong Kong because he moved to the United States, obviously. But the Green Hornet was instrumental in Lee getting approached by Raymond Chow to produce many films in Chinese cinema, namely, I don't remember what the original title was. It was the English title was The Big Boss, and then movies like The Chinese Connection, Return of the Dragon, which hilariously I believe came before Enter the Dragon, but many movies. Game of Death, which obviously Lee didn't finish. Enter the Dragon, and I know I'm forgetting at least one. Big Boss, Chinese Connection. I'll remember it after I'm done with the video, I'm sure.
Modern example, Ned Leeds in Spider-Man Homecoming initially plays into this, though it corrects the problem by giving Ned a romance in the sequel.
We actually got to talking on the plane.
And then it's worth noting that this video came out before Ned looks like
And it turns out...
Okay. I don't want to freeze it on Ned's face looking ridiculous. To be fair, this video came out before Spider-Man No Way Home, so obviously they could not have known that they would expand his role even more. But credit being given where credit is due.
We have a lot in common, so we're boyfriend and girlfriend now.
Similar to and sometimes overlapping with the sidekick, the nerd is another common portrayal of an Asian man where he's typically in the background, playing a supporting role and notably desexualized. The nerd plays heavily into the model minority stereotype, assuming that Asian men are naturally smart, especially in STEM fields. But this
Is the kid from Up Asian? Did I miss that? Isn't his name like... Oh, I forget his name. Isn't it Gus? I can't remember. I didn't realize that the kid from Up was supposed to be Asian. Am I wrong? I'm probably wrong.
intelligence comes at the cost of being socially awkward and unable to have relationships.
She asked me a question. I should probably nod.
As I kind of touched on earlier, I think The Big Bang Theory kind of makes that joke at everyone's expense who's overly smart. But like I said, Raj definitely gets the butt of most of the jokes.
They're painted as awkward and never seen as a real romantic threat.
You mind if I sit over here? I was married to Linda Cooksey.
No, why don't you sit over there? I prefer that.
Another variation on the asexual Asian is the goop.
I'm laughing at the the accent, not the fact that an Asian man got shot down. Just want to be clear.
Guru. The guru is wise, sometimes mystical, and most importantly, old.
I would make the argument that Mr. Miyagi is not mystical, and I've already touched on the fact that they said that they used a clip of Mr. Miyagi as an example of being asexual, but it's established in the movie that Mr. Miyagi was married and at least was going to have a child. I wish I could remember if... I want to say his wife died in childbirth, but obviously, like, in order to have a kid, he had to have had sex, so... I'm going to go out on a limb here, too, and assume that Quentin Tarantino didn't bother to have this actor actually learn a real language. Correct me if I'm wrong, but... I'm probably wrong, but... I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that this is probably gibberish.
His age and wisdom seemingly put him above the triviality of romantic relationships, and he almost always lives alone. The guru also often takes on the role of mentoring the white protagonist, usually in martial arts.
Action. Action.
Similarly mystical, cartoonish, and asexual feeling is the Asian male villain.
You insulted my honor again. And I kill you.
Yeah, but Chosen is awesome. So, what's your point?
He serves as an obstacle for a usually white male protagonist to overcome, often representing an ambiguous Eastern threat to Western supremacy.
The Americans are fools. I offered my services, they refused.
Playing into the idea of yellow peril, villainous Asians can also pose as threats to helpless female victims, providing an opportunity for the protagonist to display his superiority physically.
I don't really know how I feel about Temple of Doom in this context. I mean, because on the one hand, it's like, yes, we're dealing with a villain who's Indian, but they're in India. So I don't really know how to... This is what I'm talking... And this is where it can get dicey, because it's like, do you not make a villain Asian even though the story is taking place in an Asian country? Now, of course, we can go into why is it taking place in an Asian country. Did I say Asian or Indian country? I'm sorry. I meant Asian, but taking place in India. I know in the story they have to bail out of their plane, and then they end up like, wow, that was lucky. So I don't know. I think that you can read too much into anything. I don't know if this is an example of that happening. And again, I don't really, and again, I could be totally wrong. So, you know, nail me in the comments if I am, but I don't think that Temple of Doom is particularly damaging in terms of Indian stereotypes, because yes, the villain, the cult of Kali is, you know, obviously these people are Indian, but, you know, the prisoners that the Indy and Willie and Short Round Free are Indian as well. They rescue the Maharaja. Yeah, to me, and again, take this with a giant grain of salt, white man, to me, this just seems like a movie that takes place in India. So maybe I'm not reading enough into it, or I don't know. Maybe the take is reading too much into it. Jury's out on this one, at least my jury.
And sexually when he succeeds in getting the girl. Finally, the asexual Asian has also been repeatedly portrayed as a martial arts star.
Is it true what they say about Hong Kong?
What's that?
You know, all you guys do kung fu.
Of course. State law.
This particular portrayal and the popularity of the kung fu movie.
I haven't seen Fist of Legend in years, and I don't think I ever saw Romeo Must Die, so I can't speak to these. I remember watching Fist of Legend and just thinking that it was a ripoff of the Chinese Connection or Fist of Fury.
Began in large part with Chinese martial artist and actor Bruce Lee.
Bruce Lee.
We can call it
The Godfather.
fighting without fighting.
Lee's departure from the portrayal of the weak and submissive Asian man helped audiences see Asian men as strong and masculine,
A good martial artist does not become tense, but ready.
and gave a lot of Asian men confidence and pride in their heritage.
Not to mention was instrumental, not solely, but was instrumental in the proliferation in learning of martial arts in the West, particularly America. So I don't think we can deny that.
Still, Lee's popularity also helped perpetuate stereotypes about Asian men. For example, their innate knowledge of martial arts or other...
See, to me, this one's a stretch because, again, if you've watched Bruce Lee films, you know that he interacts fairly often with characters who are not innately talented in the martial arts, and these characters are usually Asian. Return of the Dragon comes to mind, the restaurant workers, which, by the way, this movie takes place in Rome. And he is sent by a relative of the owner of said restaurant because they are being extorted for protection money by a crime syndicate. And the workers are training in martial arts, but they are far from proficient. And Lee is obviously significantly better than all of them. It's also worth noting that in that movie, Lee successfully defeats not one, but two Caucasian antagonists, not least of which being Chuck Norris in the final duel of the film.
Other Asian forms of fighting, and he was rarely given love interests or romantic partners in his films. In Lee's most famous film, Enter the Dragon, his co-competitors Roper and Williams both spend the night with prostitutes.
I'll take you.
Now, this is true because the character of Roper was added, not last minute, but he was added to the script to give a white protagonist. So that is true. It is also true that Lee's had some romantic interests in the Big Boss, which again I wish I could remember the original title. Lee has a love interest in that, unless I'm mistaken. Again, I wonder how much of the. Let's remember too that with the exception of Enter the Dragon, which was a co-production between Hollywood and Raymond Chow's studio, which I believe was Golden Harvest. I could be wrong there. All of Lee's other movies were made in China. So I don't think you can really cite those as examples of Western stereotyping when not only the lead star, the producer, the director, and like everyone involved was, Asian as far as I know, with very few exceptions, I'm sure. So I don't think that's really a fair... Now, Enter the Dragon is open to criticism, not least of which being the fact that, we'll just...
And you.
While his character stays...
he takes multiple prostitutes. He's also the only one of the three main characters that dies. Spoiler alert. So that's a whole other can of worms that has valid criticism to it. The character of Roper kind of does get off scot-free. But yeah, so that much is true. But again, you have to take the criticism of Bruce Lee films with a giant grain of salt because for the most part, these were Hong Kong productions.
Is focused on the mission. The film Romeo Must Die is also infamous for its desexualization of its Asian male lead. Despite the film being a literal retelling of Romeo and Juliet, the film's version of Romeo, Han Sing, played by Jet Li, isn't even allowed an on-screen kiss with his co-star Aaliyah.
You didn't really think you was gonna get them panties now, did you?
Just Anthony Anderson saying that. Like I said, I don't think I've seen Romeo Must Die, and if I did, it was a long time ago. But yeah, the fact that a modern-day retelling of Romeo and Juliet doesn't even have the Romeo and Juliet of this particular story even kiss is... I wonder whose decision that was ultimately.
What? Trish! You didn't really think she was gonna give it up to you now, did you?
When the studio showed a test cut of the film that did include a kiss scene, the audience reacted so poorly that the scene was changed to a platonic hug in the final cut. Despite all the superficial differences between these categories of stock Asian male characters on screen, we can see how as a group they've led Asian men to be consistently perceived as nerdy, effeminate, and not interested in, or a poor option for romance.
That's a good point, because as often as I'm citing these exceptions, the fact that the stereotype exists kind of proves that overall these stereotypes, they exist. So even though I'm citing some examples of them not being the case, I'm sure that's well in the minority.
I have made a big decision.
You're having a sex change? I totally support you, but be careful, Han. Female to male is very tricky.
All these portrayals shape our opinions of Asian men in real life and have real-world consequences.
That's hard to say. I can only speak from my experience, but I mean, when I was growing up, I idolized Bruce Lee and I loved Mortal Kombat. So I don't know how much they. It probably did to a point, especially when I was younger, but I didn't understand. But I guess my point is I don't know how true that is universally. I'm sure it is true for some people. But too, if someone is idolizing a culture or a group and it causes them to learn more about it, and then they realize as they learn more about this culture and these people that they begin to see them more as individuals, is that really a bad thing in the long run? Like, I know being obsessed with a culture, especially when it's not yours, can be a very bad thing, but if in learning about it you kind of learn to see more the humanity and less the cultural stereotypes of a group of people, is that not ultimately a good thing? I don't know. Let me know in the comments.
Excuse me. Do you like Asian men? No. Thank you.
Asian men and black women are viewed as the least desirable racial dating groups, according to a 2014 OkCupid study. And the lack of romantically desirable Asian male characters on screen can also lead to Asian men internalizing this narrative themselves.
Paxton Hall Yoshida, the hottest guy at Sherman Oaks High. Look at this kid's jawline.
In 2016, a social media campaign called #StarringJohnCho went viral.
Okay, not gonna lie. I love the 2009 Star Trek reboot because I think everybody is just dead ring. They're dead ringers for the original cast, both in overall look and how they're portrayed, but they take it a step further, namely John Cho as Sulu, although George Takei did a phenomenal job. And actually, I'm wondering why they didn't mention George Takei in this. Oh, because his portrayal as Hikaru Sulu goes against what they're talking about in this video, because this is an Asian man in the 1960s on the bridge of a starship who is an officer. And I believe at one point, I'm trying to remember the hierarchy. Kirk's captain, Spock's first officer. I believe Scotty is third, and then I believe Sulu is after Scotty in the chain of command. I believe that's true. And Sulu goes on to become the captain of the USS Excelsior in the original canon. We haven't gotten that far, obviously, in the Kelvin timeline. But my point is that John Cho was awesome. And I love the little nod when his combat training is fencing, which is a reference to Hikaru Sulu, specifically the episode The Naked Time, where something, I forget what it is, something causes the crew of the Enterprise to act crazy, and Sulu's running around the place thinking he's Robin Hood or something. It's pretty entertaining.
Photoshopping images of actor John Cho as the leading role in popular film posters. While Cho went on to play the lead in movies like Columbus and Searching, the campaign highlighted how rare it was to see leading Asian men on screen, especially in films with romantic elements. In recent years, we have at last seen evidence of this trend changing.
You smell really good.
There are now more positive, well-rounded Asian male characters who experience on-screen romantic relationships. Crazy Rich Asians launched Henry Golding's profile as one of
So, full disclosure, I am 100% straight, but that is a beautiful man. And I remember when I watched Crazy Rich Asians, I remember thinking, it was like, wow, where'd they find this guy? You know? But yeah, they're right. It goes to show you, and I think we can all be pleased that it's happening. And it was funny. Something. This is probably gonna sound really, really stupid, but something did happen. And why movies like Crazy Rich Asians are important is that even though the word Asians is in the title, very soon after the movie started, I stopped. I can only speak for me, and it probably sounds stupid, but I stopped thinking of the characters as Asian. And this is why, in my opinion, this is why movies like this are important, because when the bulk, and I believe the entire main cast, certainly, but I believe the majority of the entire cast of the movie, both major and minor characters, are Asian, it does enable the viewer to kind of step away from the novelty of a certain actor's ethnicity. So in that respect, it was very, very... It was an interesting phenomenon because, again, you stop, or at least I stopped, noticing that a particular character was Asian because all the characters were Asian. I mean, the movie's not exactly written for me specifically, but I enjoyed it. It was good. It's a pretty good commentary on things like, you know, obviously, you know, loving for love's sake, and as opposed to your family kind of dictating all these aspects of your life. So.
Contemporary Hollywood's rising sex symbols.
Wherever you are in the world, that's where I belong.
Can I get his haircut?
Always Be My Maybe and Mulan highlight the romance between an Asian woman and a non-stereotypical Asian man.
So here we go again. I haven't seen Always Be My Maybe, but I want to. But we're talking about the live-action remake of Mulan. There had to be a romance between, which from what I've been told, there's not much of a romance there, because they kind of, I think his name is still Li Shang. But from what I hear, they pretty well cut his entire role out of the movie. He's certainly not Mulan's superior, from what I've been told. And I mean, but in that movie, it would have to be a love interest between Mulan and an Asian man because it takes place in ancient China. So what else is she gonna do? I guess they could have made her asexual, but asexual or aromantic, I should say, because it is a Disney film. But you know what I mean.
My name is Marcus, it's for your carcass.
More and more examples also pair Asian male leads with non-Asian women, moving away from the stereotype that only Asian women are interested in dating Asian.
I did just recently, kind of on accident, watch The Lovebirds, and it's good. It's another movie where, again, when they don't highlight people's ethnicity, they only highlight it once, and it was for a joke. Or at least as far as I can remember, they only highlight it once. But again, it's a movie that's a good example of a pretty realistic relationship, not a plot, but through the unrealistic plot, they kind of rekindle their feelings that they forgot through mediocrity, just the mundaneness of their everyday lives. So in that respect, it's a pretty good movie.
Asian men.
I am your bride.
Kumail Nanjiani co-wrote and starred in romantic comedy drama The Big Sick, which looks honestly at how an interracial relationship between a white woman and a man of Pakistani heritage has to reckon with complex cultural baggage.
So The Big Sick was an extremely good movie. It's funny, but also it actually has... Oh my God, it has... Oh, I forgot about that joke. It has an incredibly hilarious, but so... It's such a bad joke. Like, I'm not going to tell it, but it goes... You'll know it. You'll know it when you hear it. And I would like to point out that it's written by this gentleman right here. But it is a fantastic movie, and it does deal in very raw detail the culture shock of this type of interracial relationship. So I highly recommend watching The Big Sick.
How we have arranged marriage in my culture. These are those women.
These are women in Pakistan who want to marry you?
They're not in Pakistan.
Insecure's interracial relationship between Molly and Andrew shows Molly's initial bias in dismissing Andrew as a romantic partner.
Why aren't you excited about him? Is it because he's Asian? Because don't judge me.
before she eventually comes to see him as a highly romantic and sexual man, as well as a true catch.
What that dick do? Or do it don't do? Oh, no, it do. It definitely do.
The
Is she wearing a Clover's cheerleading uniform? I'm not seeing this movie. Can someone let me know what's going on here?
What that dick do? Or do it don't do? Oh, no, it do. It definitely do.
The relationship between Stephen Yeun's Glenn and Lauren Cohen's Maggie is one of the longest-lasting romances on The Walking Dead.
Maggie,
Everybody loves Glenn. And everybody... Oh, I'm so mad when... Spoiler alert. I was so mad when they killed Glenn. And I saw it coming. Still didn't soften the blow at all. Because this... I mean... Oh gosh, when this was airing, I mean, it was all Maggie and Glenn. Not all Maggie and Glenn, but primarily. Everybody was pulling for Maggie and Glenn. And I don't believe they brought up Glenn's ethnicity. Certainly not often. I don't know if they did it all, but I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've seen The Walking Dead, especially the early seasons.
I love you. I should have said a long time ago, and it's been true for a long time.
And one that features Glenn as just an ordinary guy, without any qualifiers that elevated him above normal Asian men. Additionally, the rise in popularity of K-pop bands like BTS among young female audiences shows us that society is open to redefining what kind of masculinity is attractive, opening the door for Asian men who are not traditionally masculine to have opportunities at romantic relationships in media.
We've been partnering with UNICEF's End Violence.
Not familiar with BTS, so I can't speak to this, but I know who they are, so I guess that speaks to what they're talking about here.
Program to protect children and young people.
In the end, Hollywood's countless desexualized and dismissive portrayals of Asian men have served to subconsciously reinforce Asian male inferiority and white male superiority. The asexual Asian trope as an inescapable ubiquitous.
So this gentleman right here, Jason Scott Lee, who you may know from the late 90s live-action telling of the Jungle Book, but also a fantastic biopic of Bruce Lee's life, Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, where he obviously plays Bruce Lee. One of the few reasons why I do want to watch the live-action Mulan movie, but I was told that it wasn't a very good movie. So, but I do want to highlight Jason Scott Lee in this movie.
Ubiquitous cliche limits the representation of Asians on screen and in our culture's collective mind.
We got an ATM.
I thought we already had an ATM. Asian transgender male.
Well, thank you for saying male.
Perhaps most importantly, it sends a damaging message to an Asian male viewer about himself, which is based solely on false myths and
So obviously I can't speak to that, not being an Asian male, but I'd imagine that's true, and that's why videos like this are important, because at the very least it highlights the stereotypes in and of themselves. Again, my only issue with parts of this video were some of the examples that they put forth. Just tells me that they didn't watch the movies in question.
Purposeful attempt to marginalize an entire culture. Romantic relationships are not a necessity in order to tell a story about a fully formed three-dimensional character.
So speaking of Jackie Chan, though, in terms of being asexual, I don't know that Rush Hour is a great example. I don't know that Jackie Chan is a great example. Sure, a lot of his earlier work would have been considered, like, I guess, non-sexual, but Shanghai Noon, for example, not only does he get married at the beginning of the movie, and it's implied that they had sex, but he ends up with the princess in the end. So he is very much seen as desirable by multiple people, and that story is set in the Wild West. Now, granted, I don't recall any white women being interested in him, but I mean, to say he's asexual is not accurate.
Of any background, but it's important to portray Asian men as viable options for romance, to present their desirability as one realistic aspect of their full humanity, and to remind everyone just how much they have to offer.
Will you marry me and make me the happiest man in this world?
Yes, 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 you
If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get notified about all our new videos.
So, like I said, this is the take, and in the closing, I'm going to leave this up so that it can burn into through your eye holes into your brain to go like and subscribe to the take, and then, like I said, watch the original video, which is linked down in the description, so that you can get the full effect of their video without my interruptions. But just in closing, like I said, I'm not trying to offend or dismiss anyone here. I just remember watching this video and being like, Mortal Kombat? I don't know if that's a great example. And then, of course, my diatribe about Flowers of War. Yeah, so for the record, and I'm going to put a link in the description here too, if you have Amazon Prime, which I think it's actually on IMDb TV, but you can watch it through Amazon Prime. Flowers of War is available on Amazon Prime, or as always, you can rent it or buy it. Like I said, just warning again, just in case you missed it, I recommend you watch it, but again, many disclaimers. If you are squeamish, if you have had trauma in your life, if you have been abused in any way, shape, or form, read the plot synopsis maybe and see if that's something that you're comfortable sitting through. Again, I think it's very important from a historical context to movies like that to be watched, but also understand that some people would rather not sit through that or be triggered by a movie. So once again, I highly recommend you watch it, but at the same time, just be careful, be ready to pause it, be ready to turn it off if need be. Like I said, highly recommend it, but it's intense. It's intense, but George is the hero of that movie, and I stand by that statement. Anyway, I hope you guys like this. I know it's a little bit longer, a little bit different from my other reaction videos, but if you did like it, or if you have a video that you want me to react to like this, you can get a hold of me on my Instagram. I'll put a link in that description, or you can just leave it in a comment down below, and I will check it out. Again, I want to do more blind reactions. I will say I have seen this video before, so obviously it's not a blind reaction. I would like to do blind reactions, and particularly if you would like me to do a blind reaction, just put it in the comment, and then I will not watch it until I sit down and do a reaction. But hope you guys enjoyed it, and as always, if you like more content, you can see other videos in the playlists on the Arete Media channel. Also, I do a podcast every week called the Average Intelligence Podcast, and for all you pro wrestling fans out there, I also do a bi-weekly podcast with my friend Ben, the Ref, every 2 weeks, and we talk about all things wrestling. And that's another area I didn't touch on, but there have been a lot of proliferation of Asian professional wrestlers that are gaining popularity in the West. So that's another sort of example of these stereotypes going by the wayside. But I won't bore you with that one. If you want, we can do an episode on that for the Down the Middle podcast, which is the wrestling one. But as always, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for sticking through to the end if you did. Like, share, and subscribe.